Well, I think he's the audience. I think he is the sort of receptor of the idea. I think Watson really is everyman, and one has to remind oneself that he's working with or associated with a genius. Conan Doyle, he wrote these extraordinary stories. I always think it's the clash between the kind of beginning of everybody's interest in science combined with the kind of Edwardian obsession with the Gothic. And it's the clash of these two things, which Holmes represents, this scientific mind who analyses it, and people wanting explanations, which I think may be why Conan Doyle eventually turned to spiritualism, wanting some kind of explanation.
Watson, does anything else remain for me to explain?
Yes.
I spent some of my early years in Hollywood with my father, who was under contract to RKO, and amongst his very, very close friends was Nigel Bruce, who I remember very well. Lovely, avuncular, amusing man, very good with children. I suppose I would have been about 8 years old, and I remember him with great affection. I had no knowledge that the films were being made, and it wouldn't have meant a great deal to me at that age. But of course, subsequently, they became great heroes, he and Rathbone. My father, Cedric Hardwicke, played Holmes in, I think it was 1945, with Finlay Currie playing Watson. It was for the BBC. He only did the one, I think it was the Speckled Band. It's memorable mainly for Conan Doyle's son, who talked before the actual play was recorded. I talked about his father and remembered being in a restaurant in a hotel in Edinburgh and his father identifying people, much as Holmes does.
You're a left-handed gardener. You're a student of archaeology. You've published a paper on the theories surrounding Neolithic burial rites. You are the Reverend Francis Roundhay, vicar of the parish of Tredanick Wallace.
Astonishing, sir.
In the 60s, I was very fortunate to join the National Theatre when Laurence Olivier was running it, and it was a kind of golden age for a bit. And sadly spoils you for everything else, because all of us who were in that company look back now and think, my God, how lucky we were. And Jeremy was part of that company. It was a very large group of actors, something like 90 of us, and we were divided into two separate companies, and Jeremy was not, he and I were in different companies, so I never actually acted with him, though I used to see him a lot around the theatre, and he was much more a senior member of the company, really. He was very different to the Holmes that we all came to recognise as a great performance.
And if you come down tomorrow, there's not a man from the oldest inspector to the youngest constable who wouldn't be glad to shake you by the hand.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I was luckily enough doing a BBC Shakespeare of Titus Andronicus with Anna Calder Marshall, who is David Burke's wife. And David suddenly came in one day and said, listen, I can't do, they may do another series of Sherlock Holmes. He said, I can't do it because I've accepted an offer to go to Stratford-on-Avon to work with Anna. We want to work together, and it means we can have Tom, their son, with us. So I'm going to ring Granada and speak to Michael Cox and suggest that perhaps you might be considered. So I said, oh, that's fantastic. And he rang Jeremy, and it came, that's how it happened. David couldn't do it because he wanted to go to Stratford, and so it fell to me. I had seen them, and I knew how the standard was hugely high, but as an actor, it was thrilling to be asked to do it because one knew how good it was. And, you know, I was familiar with the stories, not familiar enough as I subsequently became, but I knew there was a, you know, there was a possibility of another 10 or 15 being done, and that was very exciting. The ABBEY Grange was the first one I was involved in, and a director called Peter Hammond, who subsequently did a lot of them, did it, and he gave me a couple of notes which were hugely important to me, and they made a lot of difference to the way I looked at the part. And I think it had been a deliberate choice. I think somebody thought he can help There was a sequence in the Abbey Grange where Holmes is pacing around trying to work this thing out, and Hammond said to me, I want you to smoke. And I said, yes, what, smoke what? He said, cigarettes. I want you to smoke cigarettes. So I lit a cigarette. And he said, no. He said, keep the cigarette very close to your face. Don't move it away too far. And it doesn't really mean anything in its explanation, but in the context of what we were doing, it immediately made me think, yes, that suggests time and concentration. And it somehow triggered something in the back of my head that made me think, Watson, I don't know why, and I couldn't explain it to you. But I remember saying to Jeremy, I feel, before that happened, I remember saying to him, I feel I'm disappearing inside my costume. I just felt everything was too overwhelming. There wasn't an awful lot for Watson to do. And I do remember David saying that he found it very difficult to have to react a lot without having a lot of text. Jeremy subsequently found that he got a bit fed up, and I think understandably, with having to learn huge amounts of text, and tried to get the writers to dispense a bit of it to Watson. So I picked up some of the kind of bits that Jeremy didn't really want to do.
I recommend my friend Watson.
That's very kind of you, Doctor.
I remember one major problem I had, which was that I was always having to read things out of newspapers, and because I have to wear glasses to read, and couldn't do that as Watson, so I was always learning vast quantities of newsprint, which I found very tedious.
Holmes! Go!
The biggest compliment I had paid to me was, on several occasions, I was called David. People said, David, can you move that way? And I thought, well, there aren't too many ripples here if they think I'm David Burke. I really don't know how I differed from David. I mean, we were different. Subsequently, I've read people said I seem to be an older, graver Watson. That always worried me a bit, because I thought what I did feel very strongly about playing Watson with Holmes is that two people who work together in those circumstances have to have a lot of humour. There has to be a lot of laughter.
The hand with which you hold the trowel.
Exactly right. Precise in every detail, but how, sir, how?
Vicar. The parish magazine, it's all...
Outrageous. I consciously remember thinking every time there was an opportunity to bring out that sense of humour between two people, or the fact that you could smile at certain things that Holmes would say or laugh at things that he would say, seemed to me very important. It seems to me people who work together in a rather difficult job tend to laugh a lot.
Lestrade!
There was a wonderful file which was passed around, the Baker Street file, which had, I mean, every single detail that appeared in the stories. And I remember at one point I think I had to use a fountain pen, and I questioned. I said, this seems very modern. I said, no, it's not. It's in the file. And we looked it up. There it was. And I think somebody absolutely wrote and said, made some comment, and they were able to write back and say, no, this is absolutely accurate. And it was an amazing document. I think I've still got it somewhere. But it was a measure of the immense care that Granada took at that time with that series. I mean, there was just nothing that wasn't studied and examined. It's not easy doing period drama in modern England. I mean, you've got endless problems. The Conan's got endless problems with television aerials, and they had the most wonderful set of quickly remedied things. Like I remember at one point we were filming in London, and there were yellow lines in the road which you could see through the back window of the carriage which Jeremy and I were sitting in. So somebody came out